Thank you for joining us today for the ESSER guidance session this afternoon. My name is Wendy Fons. I am the Director of ESSER and EANS for the Office of Public Instruction in Montana. And with me today is Rebecca Brown, who is the Program Manager for the ESSER and EANS programming. Rebecca, if you'd like to say hello this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Brown. Like Wendy said, I am the program manager, and I am going to be running the slides. So I will mute myself so that you don't hear my clicks. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. As we go through the various slides, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, don't hesitate at all to either raise your hand via the visual that can be found on the bottom of the screen under reactions. You'll see a little hand raiser that you can pull up. Or if you wish to enter into the chat your questions, you may do so as well. We will be recording this session as far as the presentation of the slides are concerned. And then we will have a follow-up of question and answer session afterwards. So again, though, at any point, you're welcome to ask questions as we go through these various slides and information that we have. This is a series of workshops that we're presenting. These will be presented over the next few days. Today's are concentrated on allowable use, tomorrow on amendments, and then we also have some on cash requests coming up, and there'll be ones going forward in October and November as well. Each of these is designed to have about a 10 or 15 minute topical discussion. Again, that will be recorded and put up on the OPI website. And then it'll be followed up with an open office hour type format for you just to freely ask questions. Feel free to do that, though, at any time as we present. So we're going to go ahead and start today. Again, my name is Wendy Fons, the ESSER and EANS Director. You'll have contact information that will come up on various slides if you haven't already had conversations and emails with both Rebecca and I. So we'll go to the next slide. This is our contact information. It is available on our website as well. We do have the information also in the bottom of all of our screens. We would ask that as you communicate with us via email, if you could put into the email itself contact information for you, not just your email, but sometimes the phone number just works better to have a conversation rather than follow-up email. Next slide. So the goals for today's session are really twofold. We're going to be talking about ESSER, the grant, and how it is allowable as well as how it is reasonable. We're going to be focusing on those two items as it relates to districts changing or making decisions as they go through and spend the funds, because the funds were actually allocated to you a while ago, and you do have the ability to change those allocations. But as you make those changes, you do have to look at the rules, regulations, and laws as they apply to something that is allowable to purchase. And then also equally important is how reasonable is it? And that reasonableness really tags into your particular setting, so your district setting, the practices that are applied in your district, the standards that are used in your district, and then the transparency in terms of letting the public, which includes your teachers and staff, but also the students. So it's really all of those items pulled into one. And I really liked the visual on the right because it shows how all of these things work together to overall give guidance for compliance. So compliance is not just, can you purchase a computer, but can you purchase a computer given the setting of your particular school or your particular entity? Next slide. So when we look at how things are applied, one thing to keep in mind is what these funds are. And we had a couple of questions around just describing ESSER funds. And so I want to take you through a very high level walkthrough of these funds. ESSER funds at a national and state level, and I'm going to ask Rebecca to share her screen on that. And these are all things that you can find on our OPI website, so they're very accessible for you to look at. And it will show you a certain amount that has been allocated to our state, but also at a national level. So if we go back up to the top, And it shows there, these are the funds. So we received 605 funds, $605 million to our state in those various buckets, that ESSER 1, 2, and 3 were the primary allocations. And the ESSER 1s are going to be expended, or they have to be spent by the end of the month. So that's something that these funds came in a sequence, and their expenditures need to be done in that order as well. The 2 and 3 are still available for you to use. And now we'll go ahead and take a look at the allocations. And if we look at the last report, if you as a district clerk or superintendent wanted to take a look and say, so where are these funds in my district? I'm new to my position and I want to know where these are. You can actually go to this document. It's just a PDF, and you can search for your individual district and see at a relatively high level where those funds are allocated and how they've been decided to be spent. However, you have the ability through an amendment process to change most of that. There are a few areas where you have to spend money on lost instructional time, but for the most part, you can change it. You may have had your school board decide at one point that they wanted to buy laptops for all of the students. And so you spent it, you allocated it in one section, but now after review, you've decided, no, what you'd rather do is another project. You want to bring in an HVAC system, a heating and ventilation system, or maybe there's another project you want to buy curriculum or software instead. So you have the ability to change. And when you look at this documentation, this status report, it will come out every month, and you'll be able to look at where your funds are for your district and get an idea if this is still where you want to spend your funds. In addition to that, you have plans, and those plans will tell you how in the past, historically, that funding was allocated. So you have sort of this historical view, but you also have the present view, and then you have the ability to modify going forward where you want those funds to be used. So now we go back to the slides. And I think as you look at the historical view, sort of that national, here's all this funding that came into our state, but then you and your local districts, from a trustees and the school staff, you really get the ability to make changes. And that's where we dive now into the processing, looking at your school plans, the amendments, and the cash requests. Next slide, please. So when you look at how are things allowable or not, there are very few things that are not allowable or disallowed. It's really anchoring more on the demonstration of what is reasonable. And you need to, when you're looking at that reasonable component, you really want to anchor on what is reasonable for your students. What is the gain that the students are going to get from these funds? Many times when districts will say something like, we'd like to have a new security system because that way our building will be more secure. That's a perfectly allowable use of funds. But how is that reasonably related to your students? When you use the phrasing, it's keeping my building safe, what you're focusing on is the building. Instead of, we are focusing on our students, and so it's the student safety that will be improved, and their gain will be feeling safer coming to school, attendance will be higher, or their ability to concentrate on academics while they're in the building will be higher because they feel safe. So it's anchoring on that student gain and your particular setting. Couple of words that are good to get used to using in this process of reasonable area is prepare, prevent, and respond as it relates to COVID. So we have listed a few things here. Need for good ventilation, healthy drinking water, internet connecting, one-on-one student devices, mental health, math and reading, support, remediation. So all of those are words that you can tag into prepare, prevent, and respond as it relates to COVID. Next slide, please. A couple of documents to look at when you are reviewing a project that you wish to have approved is to look at the frequently asked questions document. And that document is just, again, a PDF that you can search through, and you can say, I would like to buy a van. Is that allowable? And the frequently asked question document from the Department of Education will then be able to tell you if that word specifically was used. It may not be. They may have used a synonym for it, or they may say the word transportation. In fact, vans are put under the category of student transportation. So you have to sort of do some wordsmithing when you're using the frequently asked question document, but it's a really good document to use to answer the question, is what you want to purchase or how you want to use the funds, is it both allowable and reasonable? The role of OPI is really to, and the ESSER team in particular, is really to be both your advocates to help you create amendments and project scopes for the capital expenditure process, cash requests, budget items, to help you create those as part of an advocacy for your project, your desire to do something, but also to wear the hat of kind of auditors, to sort of look in advance and say, what might you be audited on? Therefore, what documentation do you need? And if you've already done the research of looking at the frequently asked questions, you'll be able to note, oh, here's something that says it's reasonable. Now here's how I want to use it in my setting. And you're able to document that through the whole process. And if you get audited, then your auditors will be very pleased that you have all this documentation lined out for you. We have a couple of other examples here. The Department of Education put out some information on construction and also on labor shortages. And I think the imagery on the bottom with the wheels is important to understand, because it's not just looking at one document. It does require looking at multiples. We do not at OPI and the ESSER team, we do not expect you to become experts in all of these. We do need you to be experts in your desire of what you want to do with the funds. Our role is to help you utilize these documentations to secure the funding for use of items that you want to use on your campus. Next slide, please. So a couple of items to look at that have already come through are when we look at ESSER funding for renovation, for teachers and technology and curriculum, they can be anchored upon improving school security, improving the drinking water that might have lead in it, servicing or upgrading your HVAC systems, stipends for teachers, laptops and internet routers. All of those can be built into a project or individually requested. Again, it's just putting into the amendment. It may be the plan stated you weren't going to do anything with technology, and now you decide you are. Or maybe it was all about technology, and now you're going to focus more on teachers or more curriculum focus. Next slide, please. This slide is really designed to show you again how you can document some of that reasonableness or allowable. It's basically just doing word searches through the frequently asked question document and noting where the items are. One of the challenges about this frequently asked document is I think the people who created it may not have been teachers or school administrators, because some of the terminology they used is not anchored within that educational setting. So you might find in section C3 an allowable item that later on in C25 is coded or stated slightly differently, or may in fact conflict. And so you often have to dive pretty deep to see where those discrepancies may come about. But it's a good first look. It's a good place to go look and say, what is allowable? What is a place that I can start from? Next slide, please. When we look at the compliance issues, looking at activities is important, because often there are activities that can be allowed based on the setting that you're in. So it's not just about things that you're purchasing, but also activities. One of the interesting things about this grant is that it does require engagement in the community. And so you can actually use the funds to help create those events that would engage the public in that discussion. So an event to bring community members into the school and say, here is our plan. for this coming year, how we plan to spend the rest of our funding and gather that input. You can actually use ESSER funding to support that activity. I like the picture below again, because all of this can feel a little bit overwhelming at times. We again encourage you to reach out to both Rebecca and I and ask any questions that you have, or to support the projects that you're working on. We often have some ideas or other resources that can be built into the activity or project that you wish to do. Next slide, please. Balancing these two things out, you can often end up with, if you do a roundtable discussion with your staff, your administration, you can balance out different pros and cons of each item. So there is only a set amount of money left, and we have to expend it all by either September 23rd, September 2023, if it's ESSER 2, or ESSER 3 has to be spent by September of 2024. So there is a limited time period for these funds, and there may be competing interests of how the funds will be used. If you sit in a discussion roundtable type format and talk about, well, one group might want to use an outdoor shed for extra COVID items, the desire for that coming from teachers whose rooms are being used as storage with boxes of COVID masks or cleaning supplies. So you can weigh that out against, say, iPads with barcode readers for internships. Maybe in the internship side, you only have 10 students that are participating. Whereas on the storage shed side, you might have 3 teachers impacted. In that discussion, in a table discussion, you can then weigh out which are the best uses of funds and really gather everybody's input, because both of those are allowable. The reasonableness really depends on how you're going to use it in your own school setting. Next slide, please. So talking about the short and the long-term compliance, you do want to make sure that all items are discussed with the public, that they're aware of what you're doing. That is that transparency component of this grant. If you, an example would be if you put up a fence in your playground, you may have the public, because it's a very visible item, you may have the public upset that educational funds are being spent on a fence. However, that fence may be put up to provide safety for the students and maybe an outdoor learning space that's going on the other side of the fence. If the public isn't aware of this, then they won't be able to support the project that you're doing. Tips for long-term compliance, you really don't want to hide behind the computer. So we have all this data that we have internally, and being able to share that data out to the public really does, in the long run, build partnerships with the public, and they're able to support what it is that you're doing. That support is going to, in the long run, give you much greater pull with the community, because what it will do is showcase you've spent the money wisely, you've engaged them in the discussion, and they become owners of that project going forward. Next slide, please. So the resources that you have available in looking at, is something allowable or reasonable, are really myself and Rebecca. We're part of this ESSER team, and also Steve Morgan, who's handling the cash requests. So you have several people that you can draw upon, both from emails and phone calls. We are here for you however you'd like to utilize our services in terms of support. We also are updating our website. That will hopefully be live in the next couple of weeks, by the 1st of October. And that will have the items that we showcased for you today. They're already on the site, but we're adding some additional ones. Next slide. And again, just this diagram as a reminder that compliance is not just regulations or just laws, but it's also the policies and practices and the transparency, particularly in this ESSER grant. And next slide. So just in closing, our current website, you can find a lot of information by looking at the ESSER tab on both the allowable and the reasonableness of applying for the use of these funds. We now go ahead and open up, I know this was a lot of information, but we open it up for any discussion or any questions I don't know if there, it looks like there are two maybe in the chat session.
No questions in the chat right now.
Okay. Any questions from anyone in the audience right now? No questions? Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time today to listen to this workshop. We appreciate your coming in and getting some knowledge on these topics. We will be continuing with the workshops the rest of the week. If you have additional questions after this workshop, I know sometimes I go to workshops, I take notes, and then I go, oh, wait a minute, I've got one more question. Don't hesitate to ask us. We actually made changes to this presentation from this morning to this afternoon based on comments that viewers had made. So sometimes you have suggestions that are really great and we can implement them quickly into the slide deck or the presentation. Again, thank you so much for coming and hope you have a good rest of the day.